Welcome to the Archaeoastronomy Database. It's February 2023, and the Thornborough Henges in North Yorkshire, in England, in the United Kingdom, have recently been in the news. The site consists of 3 henges, one in the north that's covered by trees, one in the center, and one more towards the south. And it's the central and southern henges that have been donated for public access, and this has been a topic in the news recently. Now, in connection with the Thornborough Henges, there are many astronomical claims made, but today we want to look at the actual situation on the ground and in the sky. So to begin, let's take a look at the site itself. The central henge has the bank quite well preserved, while the southern henge is not as well preserved. The northern henge is the best preserved, but we can't see many features from here as it's covered in trees, and that one's on private land. So I'll add an overlay that will give you a better idea of how the site was laid out. Here you can see, looking first at the central henge, that it consists of concentric banks and ditches. This green color represents ditches, and the darker color is the bank. And you can see that there is an axis of the site running through the entrances between the banks and ditches. It's a similar situation for the southern henge, although again not as well preserved, but you can see the bank and the ditches. And the northern henge doesn't have as much detail on this plan. You can see that it has roughly that same diameter. It's about 220 to 230 meters, depending on which side you measure from. And between the sites, there's about 750 meters. It's also interesting to note that the northern circle seems to have a smaller circular feature here, and may even have a larger feature. Just has one indication here toward the south. So it'd be interesting to know more about that. Now, if we were to draw lines between the henges, we'd see that they aren't aligned in a perfectly straight line, but a slightly bent line here. And that has been the subject of a lot of discussion. And if we look closely, we can see that from an approximate center, those lines don't run directly through the axis of the entrances, but are at the edge of the banks for the central henge, and come a little more directly into the southern henge and the northern henge. So keep in mind that the lines connecting the henges themselves are not exactly aligned to the axis of the entrances. Now, one of the things that has been claimed regarding this bent layout is that there is a connection with the constellation of Orion. I can illustrate this by placing an overlay of the constellation on the map. And you can see the outline of Orion. With the central belt features. And if we look closely and toggle off the star outline, you can see that the match is quite good. Almost any time you have 3 features in a row like this with a slight bend, I've seen claims for them representing the belt stars of Orion, but this is one particular case where it does seem to match up fairly well. Now, if you compare an outline of Orion today with his outline during the Neolithic, you can see that the position of the stars relative to one another has not changed very much. Only a little bit in some areas, for example in the head, due to proper motion of the stars relative to one another. But overall, they've all continued to have the same configuration. Although due to precession, the entire constellation is positioned a little bit differently in the sky today than it was in the past. So taking that same basic outline, this connection with Orion would have more interest for me if it could be shown that there were other sites and features located at some of the key locations connected to some of the main stars of Orion, such as Betelgeuse, Rigel, and the others. Now, if we look at some nearby sites, and maybe some further afield, there is an earthwork of some sort near this corner. It's not quite exact, but I'd really be interested to know a little bit more about that, so that'll be a topic for future research. And then, if I go back through some of the imagery, it could just be wishful thinking, but I kind of feel like there's an indication of a feature in this area, and that corresponds closely to where the stars of the sword of Orion are located. I've seen some listings of a henge, or maybe even a cursus monument showing a crop mark somewhere in this area. I'm not sure if it's this feature you see in the center or this feature. There's some kind of indication in this field here, but I'm not sure about it, of some oblong feature, but I don't know if it's just a continuation of this lane of trees, or if there could be another feature that's not showing up. Up in this area, there's possible faint indications of previous features. Like this area here seems to have a faint indicator, but again, it could be nothing. So it would be really interesting for future investigations to get some LiDAR data or some geophysical surveys in these areas and see if anything else comes to light. That would lend a lot more credence to the Orion connection. But now let's move on to looking a little more closely at the henges themselves, and especially their axes, and see what astronomical indications we can learn just from the layout. So I'm going to turn off some of these other markings. And looking at the central henge first, you can see that the central axis through the entrances follows along this line. And if I come down to ground level view, you can have a quick street view actually of what the bank looks like. Then we'll come back here. And looking in this direction, we can see that using the proxy star Elnath, it will come down directly in line with this axis. And the current position of Elnath can be used as a proxy at this latitude for the approximate location of the moon at its maximum northern rising and setting positions. so at a major lunar standstill, the northerly rising of the moon. Of course, I use Google Earth just to get those quick indications on the ground where I can move around and get different views, and then I'll check those against Stellarium. As you can see here, and this azimuth in Google Earth is around 323.5 degrees, and that matches quite well with Stellarium and the most northerly setting position of the moon at this location. So moving to the southern hinge, the axis is slightly different. And we can see that moving through the entrances, we have a little different line. If this line were to continue from the central hinge, it wouldn't go through the entrances. Now this line is oriented directly on the southernmost rising of the moon, so the maximum southern rising position of the moon at a major standstill in the Neolithic. And to illustrate this, we'll look for the proxy star Fomalhaut. You can see it's right here. We can see that that will rise in line with the axis of the southern hinge. If we turn on some three-dimensional outlines of the banks of the hinge, and these are estimated to have been about 4 to 5 meters high, so quite substantial in their time, and there are indications that they were covered with white gypsum, so they would have really stood out and shone. And so when the moon was rising at this position, you can see that it would have been perfectly centralized as viewed through the entrances, and from any other viewpoint, with a moon rising, a sufficiently bright moon on a dark night, that light would just stream straight through the entire hinge with a beam of light from entrance to entrance, and you could imagine viewers standing along the perimeter of the bank and seeing that beam of light in the center. So that would be quite a dramatic sight to see. And so the same thing for the central hinge. You would be able to see that light at the northernmost moon set streaming through, either watching the beam from the bank or being in the vicinity of this entrance and watching toward the northwest for that setting. You look for the Pleiades, and then you can locate Elnath as the central of these 3 bright stars, and it will come down into that position. So you can see that with the estimated height of the northern hinge, the moon would set into part of that hinge, but just would be a little bit wider than this star proxy, of course, so you could see the moon still streaming through here. And of course, hopefully in the future we'll have a better idea of the chronology of the site and how it was laid out and how it may have been changed and expanded over the centuries. I have less detail on the northern hinge, so I'm just putting in an indication. But you can see that it has an axis also that is very possibly also connected with the northernmost setting of the moon. So it's along the same azimuth as the central axis, but offset just a little bit. You can see that these 2 lines are parallel. And so when we are looking at that same lunar position from the central axis, we don't look straight through the entrance of the northern hinge. But if we're on the ground here, and some of the terrain in Google Earth has to be checked with more accurate data and measurements in Stellarium, because the elevations, especially for near horizons, can be somewhat inaccurate. In this case, I think maybe even the trees are bringing this horizon a little higher than it would be. But if we take the same proxy star, we can see that it's coming in line right about here. And if I toggle off the three-dimensional, I didn't draw an entrance on the opposite side, but that would be able to show the proxy position here. So a lot of this would need to be checked again on the ground and surveyed, but the indications through the software is very, very strong. So you can see that access line through the features. I even noticed that depending on how the site was set out over time, that looking from the direct center of the southern site and ignoring the central site, that axis is nearly the same. So from the southern site, you'd have the southmost rising, and from the northern site, if the central site was not in position, you could again, just looking along the edge of the bank, you could see that northernmost moon set. Right there through the entrance of the northern hinge. In fact, even with the central hinge in place at about 4.5 meters in this model, you can actually still see a little gap where the northern hinge entrance is. So it wouldn't actually interfere with that sight line itself either. I also considered other possible viewing positions that could be dramatically used. And if you were, for instance, to stand on the bank near the entrance of the central monument, looking back towards the south hinge, I'll actually take the view from the ground. But that would keep you right in line. We can get our proxy star in position, right in line to see the moon rise at its southernmost position, directly through the axis of that monument. It's difficult in Google Earth to get a ground level view from, a view from anywhere but ground level. But you can see that we're still along that same azimuth from up here on the bank. And it turns out that from the bank of the southern hinge, a similar viewing position, we could get a nice, slightly elevated view of the central hinge. Again, with our proxy star setting right in the center. But you can have the moonlight streaming straight through the monument and setting over the right-hand side of the northern hinge. And if we leave that same sky view, we'll also see that from the bank near the entrance of the central hinge, looking towards the northern hinge, we'd have a similar view. Again, it's a little hard to be positioned somewhere that's not actually on the ground. Throws the angles off a little bit, but we can get that star representing the northernmost moon set into position. And so it would set into the henge like that. So if we look out the overall site, we can see that that major northern moon set along the central axis isn't aligned with the center of the northern henge, but it is aligned with its own entrance axis. And for the southern as well, you can see that that line, if continued from the entrance, doesn't line up. It has to be shifted a little bit to the right to view from one henge to the other, but through its own axis, it's perfectly aligned with the southernmost moonrise. And so that kind of indicates to me that the whole layout of the site, central to central, was aiming for a different reason, which may lend credence to the Orion connection, while the entrances of the henges themselves were shifted a little bit from where they connect directly with the other henges to indicate these maximum lunar positions. And so with a site that has centuries of use, you could imagine changes being made and alterations being made to the various sites, even possibly changing entrance orientations by backfilling and adding material. And of course, future investigation could show us a little bit more about how the site developed over time and could add to or, of course, refute some of these speculations. But I think overall it has to be said that the final orientation of these entrances are clearly indicating lunar positions. If we were to look at some nearby sites, we would see that the map seems to indicate that there are some other features that may have some stellar alignments that we can look into at another time. These lighter blue colors indicate possible stellar alignments. There's even quite a strong feature here. And then these features also align on the northernmost rising position of the moon. So if we were to drop down here to ground level, you can imagine some mounds in this direction. Could have been added later. But we'll see that with our same proxy star of Elnath, we can bring it directly in line with those features. There was also an earlier Cursus monument that the henges were later built over, and it has a bend in it as well, running to the northeast. This section with possible connections to divisions of the solar year. All in all, this is a very interesting area that deserves a lot of future study, and there are even further sites and other henges in the surrounding areas. And one day more connections can be established between these sites and in connection with the sky. So that's all for this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I encourage discussion and commenting below, both on the YouTube channel and also discussion can be furthered on Facebook. Please like, subscribe, and especially share with anyone that may be interested in this site and its possible astronomical connections. And in order to help the work of the Archaeoastronomy Database continue, your donations would be greatly appreciated, either through PayPal or by becoming a patron on Patreon. And thank you very much to those who have donated so far. This is what's making it possible to do this work. And there's a lot more to come. I've got many projects in the works right now, and just looking for the opportunities and the time as my schedule allows. I'd like to do more, and I'm working towards that. That's my goal, is to be able to increase the capacity of the Archaeoastronomy Database and make it so that it is more useful to people who are interested in the astronomy of ancient sites. Let me know if you have any questions or areas of specific interest that I can take into account, and thank you for your time.